I always knew my family saw me as the disappointment. My parents, Paul and Margaret, never really respected what I did for a living. My brother Ethan was the pride of the family, the successful one, the man with the office job, the nice suit, and the perfect wife, Olivia. I was the one who worked with my hands. To them, that meant I wasn't good enough. They never asked how I was doing or what I was working on. They just assumed I was struggling and laughed about it behind my back. Every family dinner felt like a reminder that I didn't belong. When I walked in, their smiles faded. They would talk about vacations, expensive wines, and Ethan's new promotions, and then turn to me with fake sympathy, asking, "Still cleaning streets, Lucas?" The words always cut deep, but I stayed quiet. They didn't need to know that my street cleaning job had turned into something far bigger. For years, I had been running my construction company, Taylor Groundworks. What started with a borrowed truck and a few tools had grown into a large operation. I was managing crews, taking contracts, and even buying land. I didn't brag about it because I wanted peace, not praise. But the more silent I stayed, the more they mocked me. One evening, Dad called to invite everyone for a family dinner. I showed up, thinking maybe things were different now. But as soon as I walked in, I heard him joke, "Oh, look who's here, our favorite street cleaner." Everyone laughed again. I forced a smile, stayed for a few minutes, then left quietly. That was the night I decided I didn't need their acceptance, I'd built something that spoke for itself. Not long after, I bought several properties, including the entire block where their favorite restaurant stood. I made sure no one knew it was me. The same place they loved to show off their status now belonged to the person they looked down on. Months later, they invited me again to that same restaurant. I went, calm and prepared. The dinner went the same way at first, Ethan boasting about his job, my parents ignoring me. When the bill came, I told the manager, "Put it on my account." My father looked confused. The manager smiled and said, "Of course, Mr. Taylor. As the property owner, your meals are complimentary." The whole table went silent. My mom froze. Ethan's jaw tightened. My dad just stared, lost for words. I looked at them and said quietly, "You were right, Dad. I clean streets. I just happen to own them too." Then I walked out. I didn't answer their calls after that night. I didn't need to. I had built my life from the ground up, literally. The people who once laughed at me now had to live on the very street I owned. And that was all the closure I ever needed. After that night when they laughed at me again, I stopped visiting my family completely. I focused on my work and kept building my company. Every morning, I left home before sunrise, managing my crews and learning every part of the business. I didn't have a fancy office or expensive suits like Ethan, but I had something better, real progress. My small construction company started getting attention because we worked honestly and finished projects on time. Slowly, we got bigger contracts. When the city needed a company for a large road project, I took the chance. It was risky, but I trusted my team. We worked long days, fixed roads, built sidewalks, and delivered ahead of schedule. That project changed everything. It opened doors I never thought possible. More contracts came in, more money followed, and I started buying land instead of renting. I didn't talk about it to anyone, not even my friends. I wanted my actions to speak for me one day. My parents never asked where I was or how I was doing. They didn't care. As far as they knew, I was still just the guy who cleaned streets. I didn't bother correcting them. Their words used to hurt, but now they only reminded me why I needed to keep going. The more they looked down on me, the more determined I became to rise above it. Years passed, and my company grew quietly. I started investing in properties around our town, small stores, parking lots, and later, whole street blocks. I was careful with my money and stayed humble. The irony was that the same streets I once worked on were now mine. I owned the land, the buildings, even the businesses that sat on it. But I never told my family. I wanted the truth to reveal itself in its own time. One day, a real estate deal came across my desk. It was for the same street where my parents often spent their evenings. Their favorite restaurant was right there, the one they bragged about and loved to visit every weekend. I couldn't help but smile. Without hesitation, I bought the entire block through my company. No one knew my name was behind it. It felt strange, standing in that street, watching people come and go, knowing everything they walked on belonged to me. The same kind of place my parents said was beneath them was now under my ownership. I didn't feel anger anymore, just quiet satisfaction. I wasn't looking for revenge, but destiny gave it to me anyway. I kept working hard, expanding beyond that town, building a reputation across the state. I was no longer the boy they mocked. I was a man who created his own success from the ground up, and not even my family's cruelty could take that away from me. Even though my company was growing, I never told my family anything about it. They had made it clear how little they thought of me, so I didn't feel the need to share my success. I stayed quiet, focused on my work, and kept building. Each project I completed added more value to my business. My workers respected me, and I treated them like family, something I never really got from my own. Most days started early and ended late. I wasn't afraid of hard work. I handled everything myself: contracts, budgets, equipment, and planning. My goal was to make the company strong enough to stand without me having to explain myself to anyone. The money started coming in faster than I expected. What used to feel impossible slowly became normal. I was finally living the life I had dreamed of, but I didn't celebrate. I just kept moving forward. During that time, my parents never once called to ask how I was doing. Not a message, not a single question. They only called when they needed help moving something or fixing a broken pipe. To them, I was still the same laborer's son with no ambition. I didn't argue. I just did what needed to be done and left. Inside, I knew something they didn't. I was quietly becoming the kind of person they had always admired but never respected. After finishing a few more big projects, I decided to invest my earnings. Instead of buying a new car or a bigger house, I put my money into real estate. I bought small pieces of land, old buildings, and later, entire commercial areas. It wasn't about showing off, it was about creating something lasting. I learned how ownership worked, how money moved, how property grew in value, and how one smart move could change your future completely. One day, I drove past the street where my parents often spent time. It was full of nice restaurants, shops, and new developments. I thought to myself, what if I owned something here? That thought stayed with me. Within months, I made a deal to purchase properties on that same street. It took time, but I finally owned several buildings there. The sense of pride I felt was quiet but deep. No one clapped, no one congratulated me, but I didn't need that. I started noticing my parents' favorite restaurant sitting right in the middle of one of my new properties. Every weekend, they went there dressed up like royalty, talking down about people who worked with their hands. They had no idea the person they looked down on was the same person who now signed the checks for that entire block. I didn't plan to tell them yet. I wanted the truth to come out naturally, at the right time. For now, I just watched from a distance, calm and steady, knowing everything was about to change soon. I still remember the night my dad invited everyone for dinner again. It had been months since I last saw them. I thought maybe things would be different this time, but deep down, I knew nothing really changed. I arrived early, hoping it wouldn't turn into another night of insults, but the moment I walked in, I felt the same coldness in the air. My parents and Ethan were already seated, laughing about something. When they saw me, their smiles faded just a bit, and that familiar tension filled the table. Dad made small talk at first, asking if I was still doing that road stuff. I nodded and said yes. Then he smirked and said, "Well, somebody's got to keep the streets clean." Everyone laughed again, just like before. I didn't say a word. I just looked at them, nodded, and kept my calm. I had learned not to react. They didn't know who I had become, and I didn't feel the need to explain it anymore. As dinner went on, Ethan started talking about his job, how his company was expanding, and how his boss relied on him for big projects. My parents listened proudly, asking him questions and praising every little thing he said. I sat there quietly, cutting my steak, pretending to be part of the moment, even though I wasn't. No one asked about me. I was invisible again, and somehow, I was okay with that. Halfway through the meal, Mom turned to me and said, "Lucas, you really should think about going back to school. You can't do physical work forever." I just smiled and said, "I'm doing fine, Mom." She shrugged like she didn't believe me. They thought I had no ambition, no stability, and no future. It didn't bother me this time. I knew something they didn't. The restaurant we were sitting in belonged to me. I looked around and felt a quiet satisfaction. Every wall, every table, every light in that place was mine. I had bought the entire block months ago, but I never told anyone. I had signed the papers under my company's name, and none of them ever found out. I sat there listening to their laughter, knowing the truth would reveal itself soon enough. When the waiter came with the check, my dad reached for his wallet. Before he could pay, I said, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." He chuckled and said, "Oh really? You can afford this place now." I smiled and looked at the waiter, who turned to my father and said politely, "No need, sir. Mr. Taylor owns this property. His meals are complimentary." The silence that followed was priceless. My mom froze, my brother's fork slipped from his hand, and my dad looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I didn't say another word. I just stood up, nodded politely, and walked out, leaving them to sit in the very place they once thought was too good for me. After that night at the restaurant, I didn't talk to my family for weeks. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. The truth had come out on its own, and that was enough. I didn't need to argue or prove anything. The silence that followed was peaceful. No more fake invitations, no more judgmental looks, no more pretending to fit in. For the first time in my life, I felt free from their opinions. Work became my main focus again. I started putting more energy into expanding my company. New contracts came in, and soon, we were working in different cities. I hired more people, built new offices, and made sure everyone on my team was treated with respect. I knew what it felt like to be looked down on, and I never wanted anyone working for me to feel that way. My workers were like my second family, loyal and hardworking. Together, we turned small projects into major developments. Even though I stayed busy, there were quiet moments when memories of my parents came back. Sometimes I wondered if they had finally realized how wrong they had been. But I never picked up the phone to find out. I didn't want to reopen old wounds. I had already given them enough chances, and every time, they made me feel like I wasn't good enough. I had no hate for them, but I also had no space left for their cruelty. A few months later, I heard through a neighbor that Ethan had lost his job. His company downsized, and he was struggling to find another one. I didn't laugh or feel proud about it. Life has its own way of teaching lessons, and I knew mine had already come full circle. I didn't need to see anyone fail to feel better. I had already moved past that stage of wanting revenge. Instead, I focused on giving back. I started a small program to train young people who didn't go to college, just like me. I wanted to show them that success doesn't come from fancy degrees but from hard work and patience. Watching them grow gave me more satisfaction than any expensive car or house ever could. One day, I drove past the same restaurant again. The lights were on, families were laughing inside, and everything looked warm and bright. I parked for a minute, just watching from the outside. It felt strange to think that the same place once made me feel small. Now, it reminded me how far I had come. I smiled, started my truck, and drove away. I never wanted revenge anymore. What I found was peace, the kind that comes when you stop needing people's approval. My parents may never say they're sorry, but that's okay. I've already forgiven them in my own way. I built a life on the same ground where they once tried to bury my dreams, and that's more than enough for me. After that dinner, everything between me and my family went completely silent. They didn't call, and I didn't reach out either. I think we all knew things could never go back to the way they were. For me, that moment was closure. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, but now I finally realized I didn't need it. I had built something on my own, something real, and their opinion didn't matter anymore. I started spending more time at work than ever before. My company was growing fast, and we were getting offers from bigger cities. I made sure to keep things running smoothly and invested in more equipment and training for my workers. Many of them came from rough backgrounds like mine, so I treated them with the respect I never got from my own family. They appreciated that, and soon, our work started getting noticed everywhere. My focus was clear: to grow, stay humble, and keep my distance from negativity. I moved into a modest but comfortable house outside the city. It was quiet, surrounded by trees, far from the noise of my old neighborhood. Every morning, I woke up early, went for a walk, and reminded myself that peace was more valuable than approval. My success felt different now, not loud or showy, just peaceful. One afternoon, I got a message from an old friend saying he had seen my parents at the restaurant. Apparently, they had been talking about me, wondering how I managed to buy that whole street. My friend said they looked confused and even a little embarrassed. I didn't feel any satisfaction from it, I just felt done. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than any explanation. A few weeks later, I visited the site of a new project my company had taken on, a road expansion near the same area where I grew up. Watching my crew work, seeing my logo on the trucks, it hit me how far I had come. Not long ago, people like my father used to mock me for doing this kind of work. Now, the same work had built everything I had. It was strange how life turned in circles. I knew my parents still lived in the same house. I could have gone there, knocked on the door, and talked things out. But I didn't. There was nothing left to say. They had made me feel like I didn't belong for years, and now that I finally stood on my own, I didn't need to prove anything. I chose peace over pride. I kept building, helping others, and living quietly. I didn't want to live with bitterness. I had learned that real success isn't about showing people what you've become, it's about knowing you made it despite everything they said. And that truth was enough to keep me moving forward, stronger than ever. Weeks passed after that night, and I continued living my life without thinking much about my family. Work kept me busy, and my company was expanding faster than I expected. We had several ongoing projects in different cities, and I spent most of my time traveling between sites. My focus was on growth and maintaining the quality of our work. I didn't want fame or attention, I just wanted to build something that lasted. One morning, I got a letter from the restaurant's management. It was just a report confirming new upgrades to the building and details about upcoming renovations. Reading it made me smile because I remembered everything that had happened there. That place, once a symbol of my humiliation, had become part of my success. I quietly approved the updates and went back to work, treating it like any other business property. A few months later, the restaurant organized a small event to celebrate its anniversary. The manager invited me as the owner, but I didn't plan to attend. I preferred to stay in the background, letting others enjoy themselves. But then, I found out my parents and Ethan had been invited too. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to see them again. But something inside me told me to go, not to prove anything, just to face it all calmly. When I arrived, the place looked beautiful. Soft lights, people laughing, good music, everything felt peaceful. I stayed near the back, unnoticed. Then I saw them. My parents and Ethan were sitting at a table, dressed nicely, talking to some guests. They didn't see me right away. For a few moments, I just watched them, remembering how different things used to be. Eventually, the manager walked up to me and said, "Mr. Taylor, would you like to meet the guests?" Before I could answer, he turned to my family and proudly introduced me as the owner of the restaurant in the block. Their faces froze when they heard my name. My dad looked confused, my mom blinked in disbelief, and Ethan stared like he didn't understand what was happening. I shook their hands politely and smiled. "Good to see you all," I said, keeping my tone calm. My father tried to speak but stopped halfway. My mother muttered something about being proud, but her voice shook. I didn't say much more. I didn't need to. The truth was already standing in front of them. After a few minutes, I quietly left the room. I walked outside, stood under the streetlights, and looked down the road. It felt strange but peaceful. I wasn't angry or bitter anymore. I had finally faced them, not as the rejected son they once mocked, but as the man who had built his own path. For the first time in years, I felt completely free, not because I proved them wrong, but because I no longer needed to. After that evening at the restaurant, I didn't see my parents or Ethan for a long time. Life just moved on quietly. I focused on my work, signing new projects, traveling to different towns, and managing everything from early morning till late at night. My days were busy, but I liked it that way. I had worked hard for years to reach this point, and I wasn't going to slow down now. The more I worked, the more I realized that success felt best when you earned it on your own. Every now and then, I'd drive past the restaurant or through the street that I owned. People walked by, laughing, shopping, living their lives. None of them knew that the man driving the simple pickup truck was the owner of everything around them. That thought always made me smile, not out of pride, but peace. I didn't need to show off. The streets I owned spoke for themselves. One afternoon, I got a call from the restaurant manager. He told me my parents had started coming in again, just like they used to. He said they seemed quieter now, more reserved. I told him to treat them kindly, as regular guests. I didn't want revenge or special treatment. I just wanted peace. The truth had already done what it needed to do. Sometimes I thought about how things had turned out. A few years ago, I was the one being laughed at, treated like a burden. Now, the same people who had called me worthless were sitting in a place I owned. Life really had a strange way of coming full circle. But even with everything that had happened, I never felt hate for them. Disappointment, yes, but not hate. I just didn't want to live my life carrying that kind of weight. I also noticed something changing inside me. I no longer wanted to prove anyone wrong. I had already done that without even trying. My peace, my company, and my independence were proof enough. I didn't need an apology anymore. What I wanted now was to keep moving forward, to build something lasting, something that went beyond my own pain. In the following months, I expanded my company even more. We took on bigger projects, hired more people, and opened a new office in another state. Each new milestone reminded me how far I'd come. I thought about the boy I once was, quiet, ignored, and underestimated, and I realized I had turned that pain into power. Sometimes, when I walked through that same street at night, I'd stop for a moment and look around. The lights, the buildings, the smooth roads, all of it connected to my story. The same street where I was once mocked was now mine, and I didn't need to say a single word to prove it. The silence itself was my victory. Time passed, and my life slowly became more peaceful. The noise, the anger, and the hurt that once filled my mind started to fade away. I was finally at a place where I didn't feel the need to look back. My company was running smoothly, my team was loyal, and I had built a name that people respected. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I had earned my peace through hard work and patience. I moved to a quieter neighborhood on the edge of the city. It was calm and surrounded by trees. Most evenings, I sat outside with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset and listening to the wind. I liked that feeling, simple, steady, and free. There were no fancy parties, no crowds, and no one pretending to care. Just peace and silence, something I had never had growing up. Sometimes, I thought about my parents and Ethan. I wondered how they were doing, if they ever thought about me, or if they still told the same stories about success and failure. I never tried to find out. I had learned that some doors are better left closed. You can forgive people without letting them back into your life. That was something I understood too late, but it gave me strength. My work continued to grow. We started building not just roads but also homes, offices, and public spaces. Every project felt like another chapter of my life, something built from nothing but determination. I made sure to hire people who had been looked down on, just like I once was. They worked hard because they knew what it felt like to be ignored, and that made our company different. One afternoon, while inspecting a new site, I saw one of my workers teaching a young boy how to use construction tools. The boy looked curious and proud, and it reminded me of myself years ago. Watching them, I realized my success wasn't just about money or property. It was about creating opportunities for others who needed someone to believe in them. A few months later, I got a letter from a local charity asking for help repairing an old community center. I donated the materials and my team volunteered to do the work. When it was done, they held a small event to thank us. Standing there, surrounded by people who appreciated what we had done, I felt something I had never felt from my own family, real respect. That night, I drove past the old restaurant again. The lights were still glowing, people were laughing, and life was moving on. I didn't stop or go inside. I just looked once, smiled, and kept driving. The past didn't hurt anymore. I had built my own world, my own peace, and I didn't need anything else. What once broke me had become the reason I stood tall, and that was all that mattered. Years went by, and my life kept moving forward quietly. The pain that once felt heavy had turned into calm acceptance. I didn't hold on to anger anymore. What happened with my family had shaped me, but it didn't control me. I finally understood that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who teach you how strong you really are. My business had grown beyond what I ever imagined. We were now working on bigger city projects and even collaborating with other companies. I had a reliable team that handled most things, which gave me time to slow down and appreciate what I had built. Every time I passed a road or building my company worked on, I felt proud knowing that I started all this from nothing. I didn't talk much about my personal life. I liked keeping things simple. My mornings started early with a walk, followed by work meetings and site visits. In the evenings, I often drove around the city, watching people go about their lives. Seeing clean, well-built streets gave me a strange kind of happiness. Maybe it was because I knew how it felt to be looked down on for doing that kind of work, and now, those same streets were symbols of my success. One evening, I stopped near the restaurant that had once been the center of everything. It was busy as always, lights glowing, people laughing. I parked across the street and watched for a while. I didn't feel the sting of old memories anymore. Instead, I felt thankful. That place had been where my story changed, where I finally stopped chasing acceptance and started valuing myself. I thought about my parents and Ethan. I hadn't spoken to them in years. Maybe they had moved on too. Maybe they had realized how wrong they were, or maybe not. It didn't really matter anymore. I had forgiven them in silence. I didn't need apologies or explanations. Forgiveness wasn't for them, it was for me, to let go of what was holding me back. As I sat there, I looked at the streetlights reflecting on the pavement my company had repaired months earlier. It made me smile. The same ground that once carried my frustration now carried my success. Life had come full circle, and I finally felt at peace with every part of it, the pain, the struggle, and the victory. When I drove away that night, I didn't look back. I knew I didn't need to. My story had already reached its end, not a sad one, but a peaceful one. The boy they once called a street cleaner had become the man who built his own path, literally and emotionally. I didn't need recognition or revenge. All I needed was the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had turned every insult into strength, and every wound into wisdom.